Welcome back. This is Dan Havey with CF Ninja Hacks, and today we're going to take a look at a restaurant site. Val in the group was looking to build out a restaurant site for a menu the other day, and this is how far he got till he ran into a couple problems because what he was trying to do was mimic this site right here. It's mooringrestaurant.com/menu, and he wanted to put in all the bells and whistles that they had on this site. So let's just go through this slowly and see what all happens here. We're going to have several animations. And so as you scroll down a bit here, you're going to see that animation pop in down from the top. So that just slides down from the top. And then as we get down a little further, what you're going to see is once the header goes away and we come down to this secondary menu right here, we're going to then have everything scroll up behind it. So as we come down, it looks like that. Now there's a little bit of slight other animations in here that I didn't really like, and so I didn't build them out. This kind of slides in and out or gets bigger or smaller or something. It's so hard to see as you're scrolling that unless you scroll really fast, you can't even see that it moves. So I kind of figured it wasn't really necessary. Plus, I didn't like it that much. So then as we come down the page, you're going to see here, of course, you have your different food groups, if you will, and then how they lay it out in order to have your pricing menu like you would obviously for a restaurant, which is what we're looking at here. And then we get down to the bottom, and I built all this out, but there's not a whole lot in here that is anything out of the norm. It's mostly the animations and a few other things on the screen, like setting this up down here was interesting in that I used floats on this to move items around, and I'll show you all that as we move forward. So here is my version of the site, and you'll see as we go back and forth between the two, they're pretty close. I could spend another hour and get them to be perfect, but I don't see any reason for that. So we'll just, as we scroll down the page, so we scroll down, and you're going to see my first header comes down. And how you figure out where that is you basically just put in a number to begin with, and then you go, okay, what's too high or too low or whatever. And then as we scroll down further, what I have is the menu here starts to disappear. I just have this entire section just jam up to the top because I didn't figure there was any reason to do that otherwise. Now let's go back to the mooring here, and you're going to see what happens when you come down here and you click on these items, besides having a hover effect, of course. We're going to click on it, and then the box is going to change and go around this one. And you saw it also scrolled up to the top. But what I didn't like here again is they have a little bit of that image showing, and you got to scroll up some before this goes into effect. So what I did on mine was I had it so that when you clicked on any of these, it would have everything go into effect over about half a second. And then if we here, I don't have all this built out for everything. It's just an example. So, but let's say we scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then we go over here where we want to go to desserts. Then you see the animation that it does there. Same thing, beverages, kids menu, and the box, of course, changes out for whatever is the active menu item. So now let's just go into the code itself, and there's only one item hiding in here, and that's that top banner, because down here at the bottom I have 4 different menu sections, and I'll show you that in a second, but there's no need to hide them because the very first thing that happens on page load is we run through a function that will hide each of these items and then show the one that we want to see, which of course when we come in is going to be the lunch and dinner menu, which is section number 1. So let's come into our sections, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn on that hidden section, the banner section at the very top. So we can turn that on, and for some reason it doesn't show up right away. So what we're going to have to do is go into the CSS, and we're going to come down here, we're going to change it out. We're just going to remove that position fixed. Because for some reason it's wanting to hide behind the other element, and it shouldn't be. It should be standing proud of it, but so we can look at it this way. And then the rest of the sections, let's just come in, and you're going to see I set data titles for every single one of them. So I have this one called the banner, the black at the top. Then you have your pre-header, which is this here. And then you have the header section right there. The menu, which is the part right here that floats around. And then you have our 4 different sub-menus related to each one of the items on the menu. And then, of course, you have the footer all the way at the bottom. And I use data titles here because for the most part, that's how I'm going to call a lot of these elements. Instead of using the CSS ID selector, I'm going to use the data title instead. So to set the data titles, you just come into the sidebar here, you click on the hashtag, and you just put in your data title right there, and you click on update. And of course, when you need your CSS ID selectors, they are here as well. So let's get out of that. Now, instead of jumping into the CSS, I want to go into the JavaScript first because there's quite a bit of JavaScript in here to make all these animations work properly. And the first bit of code is this right here, and all it does is it opens the launch menu on page load. So when we come in and we load the page, like I said, all of the items are already showing, and we need to change that. So all we're going to do is we're going to run this function. I have a function down here a little bit further. We're going to run this function, and then what this function will do, well, we'll show you that in a minute, but all we're doing is we're passing the variable here of 1 in with that, so we know that we're looking for the first sub-menu. So we're looking for sub-menu number 1, because if you recall over here, we had them named sub-menu 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you got sub-menu 1, 2, 3, 4. And so then we can target that based upon that number at the end. So we'll go back into our tracking code. So on page load, we're going to just run show menu, which is a function, and we're going to pass the number 1 in with it. So now we come down here to our show menu, be this section right there. And so we say here, function, show menu, section. So this says we're going to run this function. We name this function show menu, and then we're going to put in a section number. So at the top, we told it to go to show menu 1. So now section in the code here will be replaced with the number 1. So anywhere we have section like right here, here, and here, it will just essentially replace it with the number 1. So what we're going to do first up is we're going to say, we want to grab all of the submenus. So if the data title contains, so asterisk equal means contains. Down here I use just equal. Up here I use contains submenu because we want to grab a hold of all 4 of the submenus. And in this case here, we're going to automatically hide them immediately. So on page load, we're just going to hide all 4 of those submenus. So then the next thing we want to do is we want to remove the class of the menu clicked and menu clicked A, and we're going to do that for all the Nodo nav items and the A tags inside of them. So now let me show you what I'm talking about there. So we have right here, this is a navigation element, and what we want to do is we want to say, okay, not only do we want to hide all of the menus below it, we want to wipe out anything that might be going on inside of this navigation element, because as you saw, we're going to put a box around it, we're going to make the size a little bit bigger, and we're going to change the text color. Well, in here, what we're saying in the tracking code is we want to remove that as well. So not only are we going to hide all of those submenus at the bottom, we want to basically turn off any of the CSS that was on that menu item right here in the middle. And we'll get down here. Here's the CSS for whenever I'm building, like if I'm adding a class, removing a class inside of jQuery, inside of JavaScript, what I like to do is do the styling for it right here on the same page, so I don't have to be flipping back to the CSS to be able to find what I'm looking for there. So what we do is after we hide everything, so basically we turn all the CSS off on the menu, we hide everything below, and this of course happens instantaneously as the code runs. The next thing we want to do is we want to come in here now, we want to show the one that was clicked on. Now in the case here, as we're just loading the page, the first one was number 1 because that's how we called the function. And so what we're going to say here is we want to find the data title that is equal to submenu, and then you put in the section here, which would be 1. So we're looking for submenu 1, and we're going to show submenu 1. Now the next thing we're going to look at is right there. This is the navigation element for that menu that is right behind. Let me just show you right here. That menu item right back there is what we're looking for. And come on, work. This thing's still a little bit buggy. I got to work on it some more. So what that does is it says, okay, let's go find that navigation element, and we're going to go find it, and we're going to add the number 1 to it. Because there are 4 different items in there, and each one has a CSS class of nav1, nav2, nav3, and nav4. So this is the overall item. This is the nav1, 2, 3, 4. So let me just show you that on the code itself. We'll click on Inspect. So right up here is the overall CSS ID selector for this element that you get right out of ClickFunnels. And then down here, you're going to say, it says nav1, nav2, nav3, nav4. We don't have a nav5, but there's 5 that you could possibly have on the element. So that's what we're saying is come in here and identify these items. And in the first case here, we're going to add the class of menu clicked. Now you're going to see the second one down here has an A on it. So that means that instead of grabbing just the LI item right here, we're going to grab the item after it with the A for the anchor text right there. So for the main item itself, menu clicked. So we come down here, we find our menu clicked CSS. And what we're going to say is give us some padding of 0 on the top, 0 on the bottom, 20 on the left, and 20 on the right. So it gives us padding around it. And we'll go back here again. You see what this looks like. So all that does is gives us this padding around here. And then the second line is going to be put in this border, which that's going to be the border right there. And you can see now we have our border of 1 pixel solid, whatever that color is. Now the second one here is we got menu clicked A. So that's here. We're saying add the class menu clicked A to that anchor text item. And in this case here, we're going to then change the color. So we're going to change the color to the same as we have up here. We're going to make the size go from up to 22. I think it's 20 otherwise. And then we're going to say text decoration none, because what it wants to do is it wants to put an underline under it because it's the active item. It wants to make that underline, and I didn't want the underline on there. And so that's that. I mean, it's pretty simple. You just say not only show it, but then we want to apply this CSS to that element once we show it. Now, so that's how you trigger that. Now, let me show you the next thing here, and I'll come back to the rest of the JavaScript here in a minute. But as long as we're talking about this navigation item, let's go in here and let's go to our navigation, because there's a super secret trick that I have that I swear I've not seen any other ClickFunnels person use. And it is the ability to be able to call a JavaScript function from inside of a ClickFunnels, inside of a link, inside of any anchor text that you want. And that's all we got right here. We say JavaScript colon, and you saw this before, show menu 1. So when we called to have this first one, when the page loaded, we called to have show 1. Well, this does exactly the same thing. If we were to click here, it would fire off that exact same function. Well, so will all of these here. So we got show menu 2, show menu 3, show menu 4. And so if somebody clicked here, it's going to run that function of show menu, and it's going to pass the variable of 2 into it. And then what it's going to do is it's going to go out, it's going to find submenu 2, and it's going to show submenu 2, and then also put a box around beverage and change the color and the font size and all of that. So I wanted to show you that real quick before we jump back into the tracking code, because otherwise I'm pretty sure I would have forgotten it. So now let's see what else we have here in the tracking code. So next thing we have is the floating banner. So the black part up here at the top that comes falling in, that is a banner. So this code simply says that on scroll, so we say document scroll, so that means anywhere inside of the document, if the mouse is in there and the mouse is scrolling, it wants to do something. And so we're going to say here that if this meaning the document. So we're calling this from the document. You could call this from, well, in the case of a scroll, you really couldn't, but in other cases, you could put an ID selector or CSS selector in here, and then you would just say this, and this would be referring to whatever you have in there. So what it's saying is if this scroll top is greater than 110, scroll top will always return to you how far down the page you have scrolled in pixels. So if you scroll down the page 100 pixels, it will return the value of 100. So what I'm saying here is if it's greater than 110, then we want to do something. Where did I get the 110 from? I just started at like 100 because I thought that looked like a good number, and I just scrolled down the page and tested it to see what it looked like. At what point scrolling down did this thing drop down? And I figured out 110 looked about where I wanted it to be. That's how scientific some of this stuff is. So then what we're going to say here is we want the data title of the banner. So again, this banner, the black banner, has the data title of banner. Data title is hard to say. And what we want it to do is slide down from the top over half a second. So this function here just says slide down, pretty self-explanatory. This one here is slide up. And it's going to take 500 milliseconds or 1/2 of a second in order to do it. So as you scroll down the page, you get to 111, it's going to scroll down. You scroll back up, you get to 110, and it's going to scroll back up. So it's going to scroll down and scroll up whenever you pass through that 110 mark. Now, the same thing with the floating menu section, which again was this section down here with the 4 menu items. And we got basically the same thing here. We got the scroll function. And so in this case here, it says if it's greater than 230, because we wanted to scroll down further on the page before we did anything with it. And then here we're going to do an add and remove class again, just like we did down here at the bottom. And in this case here, it's going to be our fixed menu class. So let's come down to our CSS down here. And fixed menu says position fixed. So position fixed means when you do that, you're going to fix this item specifically somewhere on a page, and it's never going to move as long as the CSS is active. So in this case here, we're coming down from the top 42 pixels. So it's going to always sit 42 pixels down from the top. So let's just come back in here and scroll this. And when we get right there, boom, it just goes up. It just slaps right up there into place, which is what I wanted it to do, because otherwise, pretty much you run out of menu or run out of the word menu, and then there's nothing else to look at there. So I wanted to go up to 42 pixels, and 42 pixels is the bottom of the black section right here. This section is 42 pixels tall. So I just said, take the top of this and put it up so that is 42 pixels from the top. Then I said I want a Z index of 9. So you got your X this way, you got your Y this way, and your Z is front to back. All I'm saying with Z index of 9 is put it in front of everything else. So generally speaking, everything on the page should be a Z index of 1. What I'm saying is put that in front of it by giving it a higher number. If I wanted to put it behind it, I would give it a negative number and say -9 or -999 or whatever it would be in order to put it either side of everything else on the page. And then there was just a little bit of a box shadow at the bottom, and all I did is I swiped that off the other side because I figured why think about the box shadow that much. So that's how I got the box shadow there. So let me see here. The last part here is we want to animate this menu when it is clicked. So down here again, this was the CSS ID selector for this menu element right here in the middle. So what I'm saying is when that is clicked, when any of the items in there is clicked, we want to scroll top 231 pixels. Now, why is it 231? Because here we say, when we activate this floating menu, the menu that we're talking about right here, when we activate that, it has to be down at least 230 pixels. Okay, so I seriously, it took me half an hour to probably figure this one out because I put scroll top 230 and it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't work. I'm like, this should be working. Problem is, this says if it's greater than 230. So I have to set this to 231 so that it's greater than 230. And then what it'll do is it will slide up into place over again 500 milliseconds or 1/2 of a second. So let me show you what that is right there. So that is the part here where we click on beverage and it scrolls up to the top. And we click on lunch and dinner and it scrolls up to the top. And the same thing here, it'll scroll based upon where it is on the page. So what it's doing is it's taking everything down here and is scrolling it up to 200, well actually scrolling this part here up to 231 pixels, and then everything else is just going into place. So I think that is it for the jQuery code. So now let us jump into the CSS. And you, of course, are going to see here on the screen that what this is this is desktop only, because on mobile, it just didn't look right in there anymore. So once you get down below 770 pixels and you're on a cell phone, and I'll show you that at the very end, I just said, well, there's no reason to have this word menu on there anymore. So I just took it off and made it desktop only. So the first thing we want to look at is the element up here at the top. This is that banner, and all it is a 2-column row. I just grabbed the image of the mooring off of the other site and put that in there. And then what I have here is I have 2 different navigation elements. You're going to see that they're side by each right there. So let me go into our CSS and let me actually turn off what is known as flex. And what it's going to do, and actually let me do this, let me increase the height of this banner so we can actually see the thing. And I can just shrink down my box here so we can see the whole thing at once. Okay, so what I did here, forget these top 2 lines. With the banner again, we're going to say we want it to be fixed like we just did on the other one. The other one, the menu banner, or the menu section, we had fixed, but we had it at top of 42. Here we have top of 0. And we're also saying put it proud of everything else and put that same box shadow at the bottom of it. Now here what we're using is display flex. So what I did in this right-hand column, this is the CSS ID selector for that right-hand column, and I just put in this thing. It's called display flex or flexbox. And flexbox is pretty cool because there's inherent problems with floats and things like that. Even though I'm going to use one later on here, there still can be some problems with it. Even absolute positioning sometimes can be an issue, because once you absolute position something, everything else wants to come in underneath it. So they invented this thing called flexbox, and it gives you the ability to take all of the items inside of a column or inside of a row, however you set it up, and be able to align them any way you want to. Now in this case here, by default, what it'll do is if you got a couple items stacked on top of each other and they have a certain width, depending on the width, what they will do is they will line up next to each other. So in our case here, the top item here, the one that says reservations, this item I made at 65% width. The second item I made at 35% width. And then the top one here, I floated this to the right. The bottom one, I floated to the left. And in fact, if I click on it here, we can see that here. So this one's 65%. This one's 35%. This one floats to the right. And you set that up right inside the navigation element. This one here floats to the left. And as far as if we're talking about navigation elements, I'll just open this up. And so all I have in here is just the 3 words, reservation, menu, and whatever the third one was, private events. I just have that in there. You, of course, would put in links to where you wanted them to go to another page, or you could put in here that you want them to scroll down to, submenu 4 or something like that, whatever you would like there. On the second one here, I have the same thing. I have hours and info, and then I have the phone number here, but then you're going to see the Facebook and the Instagram icons. Well, there's no way that I know of, at least, that I could put those directly into that navigation element, so I had to use a little CSS trick known as before and after. I'm sorry, actually, just in this case, we're just using before, which is a pseudo element, they call it. So let me, I guess I'll just leave it right there where it is. So we got the widths here, and then nav li, so we got a list item afterwards, and I did a padding right of 15 pixels. So let me just come in over here. Let's open these up. So we're in this element right here. Either one of these will be the same. We'll just go with this one right now. So all I'm saying here is right here, this item, we want to give it 15 pixels of additional padding, or what was it? Yeah, 15 pixels of right padding, just so that it pushes these apart the proper amount and so that it looks okay. That's all that says. And then, the spacing, the letter spacing. On the original, the letter spacing was quite wide, so all I did is I did the same thing. I came in and I said the anchor text for these, and I said the letter spacing of 2 pixels, and it just spreads it apart a little bit. But now here becomes the little bit more of the tricky bit, is So let's go back into our code here. As we had talked about before, each one of these is named nav1, nav2, nav3, nav4. And so actually let me go inspect this one here. So we have all those set up right here. And nav3, let me open that up. And I will open up the before. Okay. So what this does is, because we can't really put that, I'm using Font Awesome icons here, we can't really put that icon in there as a navigation item on its own. So what we have to do is, I had to pause for a second here because I realized I was in the wrong element. I was supposed to be up here in that top banner. I was actually pointing into here, and I'm like looking at it, and the CSS ID selectors weren't matching up. So let's instead, let's go in here and we will inspect this. It's going to be exactly the same thing. It's just that it makes more sense if I show you the one I'm actually pointing at. So we got here nav 27084. And so we got nav 27084 on both of these right here. And then we're saying for nav 3, so nav 3 is what is going to become, let's open it up here. So we got nav 3 is going to become our Facebook icon. And then we just click on before. And what this code does is this actually creates this before pseudo element. And so with a pseudo element, you can use it to put content into places. Now, you don't always put in content. A lot of times you'll see it, it'll say content, and it'll just be 2 quote marks. And that just says, okay, we're using this, but we're not actually going to put any content in there. And a lot of times you'll use it to make like background overlays and insert background images and all kinds of stuff like that. So what we're saying here is this /F39E, that is actually the Font Awesome code representing that Facebook icon. That's all that means right there. And then the font family, we say Font Awesome 5 brands. And again, that's something you just get from Font Awesome. They give you that. Now, normally, I made myself a note here because normally it's Font Awesome 5 free. And so it seriously took me at least half an hour to figure out that I needed to put the word brands there instead of free. As soon as I did, it worked great. And then I put in the font weight, the font size, and the font color. All of those are very standard things. So basically, you treat these fonts just like you would any text characters, any headline, subheadline, anything like that. You could change out the font weight, the size, the color. You can underline them. I don't know if you can do italics, but you can try it if you want. So second thing here then is we have the one for the Instagram. The only difference is the number changes slightly, and again, you get that from Font Awesome. And then as we scroll down here, what we're saying is as we hover over any of these elements, we want the color to change to white. So if we come in here, we hover over there and there, they all change to white as we hover over them. And again, if you're ever curious to see what that looks like inside of the code, where we write here. So it's the CSS ID selector, then we have a class of nodo_nav item, and then A for the anchor text. And then we have hover, indicating that it will be a hover state. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in here. So we got nodo_nav item, okay? Then we have A right there. So let's click on our A. Now, if you want to see what it's going to look like in the hover state, you click on hover, and then you check that box right there. And you see stuff changed on here because now it's going to be white instead of that whatever color that was there. And so you see here as I turn this on and off, it changes the code and tells it to be white instead of that other color. So now back into the code. And then one last thing here. Let's see here. Oh, okay. So that only covered the first 2 elements. And then the other 2, because we had to do, something goofy up here, we are saying the exact same thing, though. So on nav 3 hover, before color white. So the only difference here, instead of having the hover like that, we had to put the word before afterwards. And of course, instead of the A, because there is no A, because there is no anchor text on those, So as we come in here, we're going to still be on the A item, even though we are on 3. And again, we're going to see here that when we turn on the hover and we turn it off, it does the same thing. And the reason why is because the A itself, that's part of the menu element, the navigation element. And so that's where it puts it into the code, but even though it doesn't, we don't use the A here at all. But basically, you don't have to worry about that. So now the next one here, we're getting into the header section, but let me do this before we go any further. Let's clean this up. Okay, so the header section is this section right here with the mooring image in it, and a lot of it is exactly the same thing as we just did above, because we're going to treat these two elements pretty much the same. Now, we don't have to get to them side by side up here at the top, so we don't have to go through the 65, 35, and the flex box. But what we're going to do is still affect the items the same way as far as the two icons go. So you're going to see essentially exactly the same code down here for dealing with those icons, and then also down here for dealing with the hover. So that's basically the exact same thing as we had above. And then let's just come up to the top. All we're saying here is in this section here, we want to set a height of 325 pixels. And there are other ways of doing this, but my favorite way is just come in here and just set a height on the element. That way you know how tall it is, you know the image is going to fit into it. And, otherwise people put in extra padding, or they'll put in elements and then basically hide them and things like that. And that just doesn't really work. So then we're going to have a position relative, and the reason why we're doing that is because we have absolute positioning down below here, so we'll get to that in a second. Anytime you have absolute positioning, it has to be inside of an element that is positioned relative. Anytime absolute fixed has to be inside of one that is relative. And normally, inside of ClickFunnels, you would not have to do this. So actually, let me turn this off. Yeah, okay, it's not working. So normally you don't have to do it, but in this case here, what I think it's doing is the bottom part here wants to come up underneath it, and so we had to set it like that. So on the background size here, though, where we have that set to cover, and we made that important. Again, you always got to put in important to override certain things inside of ClickFunnels. So we're saying to cover the whole area in the background here, and then we want it to be positioned in the center. So just take that image, put it in the center, and then cover the whole thing. Had I not done this, I will show you what will happen. And you see the image moves some. It's slight, but in order to get it to line up properly and look proper, I had to put those items in there. Again, letter spacing, got that right here to make these words, these letters a little bit wider apart. And then here we have before. What this did, and that's why we needed the relative up here, because actually if you watch this again, what it is we are creating overlay, a dark overlay. If you look at the original here, if you pull out the picture, you're going to see it's much, much brighter colored. And what we did is we put in an overlay over the top of that. And so let me do that. So if we don't put in this position relative up here at the top, it takes up the entire page. And so that's why we had to put that there. And so now here we're using another pseudo element of before. And here's the case here where we're not putting in any actual content. We're saying we want a height and a width of 100%. We want a background color that is black and an opacity of 0.5 so you can see through it partially. So let me just remove this background color, and you're going to see the image in the background get much brighter. And then we will remove that. And if we change the opacity, we take that out. Now it's going to be completely black. And the only other thing here for the header is I had to put in border left of 1 pixel, padding left of 10 pixels. All that does is that puts in that little white line right there. And so they had the same thing there. So I wanted to also put in a white line. So we'll keep going down the page. Then we get down here to the menu section. And in the menu section, Again, we have the navigation item here, and all we're saying is we want to put the padding around it, and I think no, actually, this is different padding. The padding we saw earlier was for the box. This padding, even though it's exactly the same, that just gives a little padding around the individual words themselves. Let me see if I take this out, if you're going to be able to see what happens here. You just see they got a little bit closer together because we took out that side padding. And then we have here, all of this is what makes everything line up properly down here at the bottom. So let's jump out of the CSS for a minute and talk about what I have going on down here. So again, we have 4 different sections, and each one is sub menu 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you click on one of these buttons, it's going to take us to that section, or more accurately, it's going to show that section. And then all I have here is a single column row at the top, and then I have a 2-column row down below. And basically, once I figured out how I wanted everything lined up here, I just cloned the items and then put it together. But let's take a look at how I did this. And so here, we're going to open this up, and we're going to show that we have a data title on this of menu left. And then here, we're going to have a data title of menu, I forget what it is, menu text. And then over here, we have a data title of menu right. And so you'll see here in the CSS code in a minute, what we do is we make menu left 75% of the width, menu right 25% of the width, and this one here is also then 75% of the width, just so otherwise the text, like when you got longer text here, it runs all the way across, and that just didn't look right. Now, I did it this way because we could try a bunch of stuff. Like I said, we could try flex, but in order to get flex to work, it would have tried to keep stacking things side by side by side all the way along here. Could I have gotten it to work? Yeah, maybe. And also other issues here is, so where you have you're going to have a menu left here, but then you have another menu left and another menu left with 2 menu rights, and the same thing over here. These are all menu lefts with then menu rights across the way. And all we do in here is you take these and you have to line up each one of these menu rights under the menu left. So we're going to come in, we're going to grab a hold of this one. Let's say we want to move it, and all you got to do is drop it below it. And then, because what the code's going to show to do, which is very, very minor, what the code does, it's going to move it over here. And then I do believe I have minus 22 at the top. So if we were to take out that minus 22, you're going to see it's going to be sitting down here lower. Well, of course, we don't want that. That's down too low. So we're going to put in minus 22 pixels at the top margin. And so it's going to pull that up. Otherwise, there's really, I mean, there's a little bit of padding above here, a little bit of margin above there. And each one of these elements has some margin as well, just to get everything to line up properly. Let me just see here. This should be like, yeah, top 20, top margin 20 there. So now let's go into our CSS and come down to here. So again, here we got our data title of menu left, width of 75%, menu right, width of 25. And in this case here, we're saying to float right. So all it does is, instead of being on the left-hand side, and let me just take that out and I'll show you. So if it were to be on the left-hand side, it's going to get all jammed up under here, because remember, it has minus 22 pixels. And so that's where it's setting. Otherwise, it would be setting right below here if we didn't have the minus 22 pixels. And so then let's go back into our CSS. Turn that back on. And again, the only other thing here was our menu text of 75%. And again, that was just to keep it from looking to, go way across the page like that. So now the last part of this was to build out the footer. So again, down here, we got a 2-column row followed by a 1-column row, and then which you can't even see the row part because it's 100. There's no padding, no nothing around it. I guess here if I go way up to the end, and then we have a 4-column row at the bottom. And let's just take a look at what I did in the CSS here. And so we got a temp icon element, has a width of 20 pixels, and it's floating left. And what that is actually these two icons right there. So I found, actually, as I'm doing this, I found another way to be able to, let me just pull this down here and get it out of the way. I found a way to be able to line up these icons right next to each other. And the simple way was this is the element I just showed you on the CSS. I made this element 20 pixels wide. And so actually, let me do this. Let me clone this element. And now we'll pull one of these up right underneath the F, if we can get it there. Well, let's drop it above it. Well, either way, it went right up next to the side of it because that first one is set as 20 pixels. Now let's come up here and drop in this one. It should stay underneath it. But if we come in and we grab the same thing here, and I'm at this point here, I'm kind of experimenting because we'll see what'll happen. Let's do this. Let's copy that. Let's go into our CSS all the way down to the bottom. Let's put that in and put a comma next to it. And yeah, so each one of these is going to get 20 pixels of width. I would probably change that a little bit just because there's a spacing issue there. You could set them individually, but you could do that and line up a whole bunch of icons right next to each other. Just give them small widths, and the code will automatically just put them in like that. So I just kind of learned something there myself as I was building this out. So now let's come in and let's get that element the heck out of there. Let's do that. Otherwise, let me see here. This is just an input item, and I just used some standard, you just used a theme here, and then once I did the theme, then I came back in and I told it I wanted the email icon there, make it colored and position it to the right. This button right here, again, everything is just standard styling on that button. We got our text color of this, background color, and then let me see, fluid, display inline, custom. So you can see everything on the screen right there that I did that. So the only other item we have left is this image, and how I created this image. This is actually a background image, but what I did, and let me see where I have an image on the page. Let's just go into this image so we can get into the editor itself. So I came in here and I went up here to map. And what I did is I put in the address of that restaurant, and then I told it to generate the image. I told it I wanted a marker. I wanted the color red, large size, and then I generated the image, and then I clicked on save and upload. And then what it did is it gave me this image right here, which I could then take and use that as the background image. Let me cancel out of here. Went into the column. So let's go into our columns, go all the way down to the bottom. We got footer, second column, came in here, and I just put that image in right there, fill 100% width, gave it a little bit of top padding. I guess I didn't need top padding there. And that was it. So then a little bit of CSS had to be applied to this because otherwise it wanted to be too, no, it didn't want to be long enough at all. That's what it was. It didn't have any height because there's nothing inside of that column. So all I said is give me a height of 250 pixels. You can see without it, it goes away. And then background position of center. Let me turn that off and let me skinny this up some. Okay, without the background position of center, it didn't know to put this in the middle. So whenever Google Maps is making a map, they're always going to put what the address was that you were looking for right in the middle of it. And so that's why you have to just make sure that it is centered in the middle like that. Now, the only other thing we'll take a quick look at is mobile. And I didn't do anything for mobile at all. And that was the nice thing about the way I set this up, is it actually turns out to look really nice on mobile, except, like I said, I removed the menu. So let's go into the page itself. Let's turn on the mobile emulator. And so here is the page at 1440 pixels wide, which would be laptop width. As you can see, it says right there in the middle at the top. And so we see what it looks like on our laptop. And then we can go to an iPad, so 1024 in width. And again, I still have the word menu there, and we still have the 2 columns here and the 4 items across. And as we scroll down, that looks just fine. And then we can come in even smaller. Well, let me see here. Okay, so smaller. So we got a tablet, 768 pixels wide. So here we are below the breakpoint for mobile inside of ClickFunnels, which is 770. And so it took out the word menu, but everything still looks really nice up here at the top. We're 4 columns wide here, and we have our menu. Now in theirs, when you go to mobile, and let me just inspect this page and open that up. $768. I guess not a 768, they didn't have it, but once you get to a mobile, they actually turn this into a drop down. And I just kind of thought that was overkill. Wasn't really necessary because I thought it looked just fine on mine. So here we're still a 768. But now let's go down to 425 and let's open this all the way up. So even at 425, you still have this menu there. You got this one. As we start to scroll down, you're going to see the top come down, and all it does is the mooring, because everything else floated down to the next line, because it's always going to stack whenever you're in mobile. And so because we only have a 42 pixel height here, is only just going to show us the mooring at the top. So I thought that turned out really nice. And as we come down further, you got these 4 like that. And the menu, because of the way I set it up, you can still see the whole menu on the screen. So if you think that maybe the problem is it's going to be too long, well, then maybe we do have to build in this kind of a drop down, which of course is more than possible. In fact, it's not even that terribly difficult. I just didn't think it was necessary. And so that is it. So I don't think there's anything else to show you on this page. So as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Have a great day.